Welcome to the Albuquerque Journal's Tech Outlook podcast. CNM is truly one college with infinite possibilities in tech and data sciences. CNM offers programs where everyone can learn about software, apps, or how to build websites. You can also choose from AI programs and machine learning, the Internet of Things, and so much more. CNM, one college, infinite possibilities, and the proud sponsor of the Tech Outlook podcasts.
Welcome to Tech Outlook, a podcast from the Albuquerque Journal Business Desk. My name is Megan Gleason, and I'm a reporter here at the Journal. Today I'm joined by Dr. Shari Kelley, who's a senior geophysicist and field geologist at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources and the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. Shari, thanks so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm a geologist here at the Bureau, which is the State Geologic Survey. I have a few jobs here. I make geologic maps, and I am a geophysicist, and I am in charge of the geothermal research program.
Very cool. So how did you get into the field of geology?
I grew up in the Sacramento Mountains in south central New Mexico, and the limestones there are full of fossils, things like brachiopods and crinoids and things like that, and I became very fascinated with those. And I decided at the age of 9 that I wanted to be a geologist. Yeah,
and tell me about your studies. Where did you get your degrees?
I went to school at New Mexico State University. That's where I got my bachelor's degree. While I was there, I met two professors, Chandler Swanberg and Paul Morgan, who were interested in geothermal research. And I was lucky enough, along with several of my fellow students, to be able to travel around the state gathering geothermal data. And when it came time to go to graduate school, we have an energy efficient lighting here. When it came time to go to graduate school, I met both Dr. Swanberg and Dr. Morgan suggested that I go study with Dr. David Blackwell at Southern Methodist University. He was the foremost geothermal expert at the time. Dave was a great mentor, and I learned a lot from him.
Yeah. And being a geophysicist and a field geologist, what do your typical days look like? Run me through a typical day for you.
Well, because I have a variety of jobs, every day is a little bit different. As I do field geology, I get up and go out and make geologic maps, which is awesome. And when I'm in the office, I do a variety of things. Recently, I've been doing a lot of work on geothermal research, because we got some funding from the state legislature about a year ago, and we are lucky enough to have continued funding for the next 3 years. And so we're starting to really set up a research center at New Mexico Tech and within the Bureau of Geology. And this past year we've been working on building or updating our geothermal database. We've been talking to New Mexico State University about a geothermal system that they had in place down there to see if there was any chance of getting it going again. And been organizing workshops designed to connect people at universities and national labs, legislators, policymakers, regulators, and the geothermal industry, so that we can really get geothermal off the ground here in New Mexico.
Yeah. And what would you say is the most interesting part of your job?
I guess I love field work. I like getting outside and either making geologic maps or collecting data. We do have equipment here at New Mexico Tech and within the Bureau to go out and collect temperature data in wells, which is an important aspect of trying to understand geothermal resources. And we have some geophysical equipment that helps us better understand the subsurface of New Mexico.
Yeah. And let's get into the nitty-gritty a little bit. What exactly is geothermal energy and how does it work?
Well, it's based on heat coming out of the earth. The heat within the earth comes from two sources. One is related to the formation of the planet billions of years ago. And then up in the shallow part of the earth and the earth's crust, there are common rock-forming minerals and common rocks that have uranium, thorium, and potassium in them. Those elements are radioactive, and when they decay, they generate heat. And that's the main thing that keeps the Earth's heat engine going. So there are places around the Earth where there are shallow heat sources that are related to active tectonics, faulting, and that kind of thing, or active volcanism. And in those places, you don't have to drill as deep to get to the temperatures that you would like for economic development of geothermal resources. So some of those places here in New Mexico include the Valles Caldera, which has a cooling magma chamber beneath it, and there is a geothermal system that was explored extensively back in the 70s and 80s in that area, but although it had the heat, it didn't have enough water, so it was never developed. And now that area is a national park, and that resource is off limits. And the rest of New Mexico, and in many other places in the western U.S., the crust is under extension, and the crust is being thinned, and heat wells up into beneath the thinned crust. And those are good places to explore for geothermal resources. We can use that heat to heat and cool buildings, heat greenhouses, raise fish, or make electricity if the temperatures are high enough. There's a spectrum of Earth's heat that can be utilized.
Yeah, and why do you think it's helpful or even necessary to utilize geothermal energy in today's climate?
Well, an overarching goal is to try to reduce CO2 emissions. And here in the state of New Mexico, there's the Energy Transition Act, I think it's called, that really wants us to shift from fossil fuels to renewable resources by 2045. And so there are a number of different carbon-emitting sectors within our country. One of them is residential. It's about, let me put my numbers right here. Residential is about 19% of our CO2 emissions, and so if you could use Earth's heat to heat and cool buildings, that would reduce our footprint quite a lot. Another, of course, is transportation, and so if we can figure out a way to use geothermal energy to generate electricity, we can help that transition to electric vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah, in this podcast, Tech Outlook, it's focused on tech, right? So can you speak to the tech that goes into accessing geothermal energy?
Certainly, there's been some remarkable, almost spectacular innovations in technology. One of them happened between the 1980s and the 1990s. And there was a big push for geothermal in the 70s and 80s, and there was power plants that were built, and the turbines were in direct contact with, or nearly direct contact with, the hot geothermal fluids, which contained a lot of dissolved elements that would precipitate out on the equipment and clog things up. So one of the big innovations was the development of binary power plants, where the geothermal fluids transfer their heat through a heat exchanger to another loop that is filled with an organic compound that has a boiling point lower than the boiling point of water. And so the geothermal fluids never come in contact with the rest of the equipment. And so suddenly, instead of having to look for really super hot boiling resources, we could start utilizing resources that were on the order of 150 degrees C, and maybe even a little bit lower. So that was one big innovation. Another thing that has been going on recently is finally creating a true engineered geothermal system. And the research was done at a facility called Forge, which is run by the University of Utah and the Department of Energy. And they are using oil and gas technology to drill horizontal wells. And so they have one horizontal lateral above at a greater depth, and then one that's shallower. They map out the fractures that connect the two, put the casing in, perforate the casing, and then they've had success connecting fractures between the two wells. And for one, we finally have a fully functioning EGS system that was based on the Forge research at the Google power plant that is being built by Fervo.
Yeah, really exciting technology in this field. And we've had some new developments with geothermal in New Mexico. Lawmakers passed measures in the 2024 legislature focusing on expanding geothermal energy efforts. Can you talk about those measures?
Yes. There's a group called the Geothermal Working Group that's been together since February of 2022, led by Tom Solomon, who is a community activist, and Senator Ortiz E. Pino, who watched a TED Talk that excited him about geothermal. And so they decided to start kind of seeing if they could learn more. And somehow I was tapped to teach them about geothermal energy. And over the last couple of years, we have attended numerous committee meetings and have done a lot of educating of the legislators. And we put together a set of bills last year that were designed to incentivize geothermal development. One of the bills was about creating grant funds and loan funds to spur development. The grant funds were designed to help universities and tribal groups and state agencies to do geothermal research and development. The small business loans were for the geothermal industry. And then the other bill is a tax credit for generating power. And then there's another bill that was put forward by Senator Sewell about ground source heat pumps, incentivizing that by offering a $9,000 incentive to install these systems. So, and the other piece of it is we're looking for some funding for the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, who administers the permitting for geothermal to increase their staff. So we were not successful in passing we passed the House and Senate last year. The governor did not sign it. We did it again, very similar sets of bills, and we were successful in getting it through the House and Senate again, and the governor signed it last week. And we are very excited about that.
Yeah. And yeah, I know we're still fresh off this year's session, but do you have any thoughts in mind on what you want to see pass the legislature in this field next year?
Well, in the course of an analysis of the of what is ultimately called, House Bill 91, the Office of the State Engineer had some questions about water use. There's a clear piece of legislation that says anything that is hotter than 250 degrees Fahrenheit is geothermal and is under the purview of Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources. And then anything that is cooler than 250 degrees Fahrenheit is under the Office of the State Engineer. But we are now proposing to use the shallow and cooler waters for geothermal purposes, mainly ground source heat pumps or maybe thermal energy storage. And so I think there's going to have to be some clarification about those applications so that we don't interfere with drinking water.
Yeah. And speaking about New Mexico specifically, what works well with geothermal energy here, and what are some challenges that the state is still facing? So
we have a geologic feature that bisects the state that's called the Rio Grande Rift, which allows Earth's heat to come closer to the surface. And there are several manifestations of it at the surface in the form of hot springs at Truth of Consequences and Ojo Caliente and other places like that. So we know we have good resources here, and it's geologically controlled, and we understand the geologic processes that are controlling the location of the resources. There's a couple of challenges. Some of our geologic basins are very well studied. There's lots of data. There's lots of wells. There's lots of geophysical information that we can use to help us find resources. But there are parts of the state, particularly the Mesilla Basin and, well, most of the basins south of the Albuquerque Basin, really the amount of data that is available to help us pinpoint resources is not available. So doing some more geophysical surveys would be helpful for helping us locate those what are called blind resources, things that don't manifest themselves at the surface, but if you were to drill into them, you would be able to utilize the resource. Another barrier that is not New Mexico centric is permitting on federal lands. And right now, Senator Heinrich is working with a group of other senators at the federal level to make permitting on BLM land for geothermal more on an equal footing with permitting oil and gas wells on BLM land. So it's a barrier now, but people are aware of it, and we're starting to get hopefully some resolution.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I want to ask you is, looking ahead, what do you see for the future of geothermal energy in New Mexico?
Well, I've been in this business for 45 years, and for the first time ever, the geothermal community is embracing the entire spectrum of Earth's heat. Everything from really low temperatures of like 50 to 60 degrees C, 50 to 60 degrees F, to heat and cool buildings. And then there's a kind of a middle ground of temperatures below about 250 degrees Fahrenheit that can be used to heat greenhouses and to raise fish and to just do all kinds of more direct use. And then there's on the other end of the spectrum, above 100 degrees, 150 degrees C, power plants. So it's a very exciting time, and as part of the geothermal working group, we've kind of outlined a plan of attack, I guess. There are a number of resources that are low-hanging fruit, and those are the things that we would like to target to utilize. There's a fantastic geothermal resource just off the campus of New Mexico State University that was used for many years to heat the campus, and bringing that back online is a goal. And then, so that's just one example of something that could be done relatively quickly. Building power plants, backing up, drilling geothermal wells, and then building power plants, that's a longer-term goal that probably is, a decade or more out. But that's something that we would like to see developed.
Yeah, very exciting and rapidly changing field. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Shari, thank you so much for being here and letting me pick your brain about things geothermal.
All right, well, I'm glad that you're excited about geothermal.
Yeah. If anyone watching is interested in coming on the podcast and talking about things tech-related, just send us an email at techoutlook@albuquerquejournal.com. Otherwise, I think that's it for this week. So be sure to tune in next week for a new episode, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.